Welcome to the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. This is Dr. Yvette Martinez-Vu, and I will be serving as your femtor, providing you with tips and tricks and everything else you need to know to get into graduate school. For the past 10 years, I've been helping undergraduate students get into top graduate programs in their field, and I'm really excited to share this information with you too. All right, welcome everyone. I have a really special guest with us today who's going to be talking to us, or who's going to be discussing the topic of talking about graduate school with first-gen parents. Our guest today is Bryant Pahl, and I'm going to go ahead and get started by introducing him with his bio. Bryant Pahl is a first-generation Ph.D. student at UC Irvine, where he is studying Earth system science. Going into his second year, his research focuses on paleoclimate. He works under Dr. Kathleen Johnson's lab, where they specialize in using speleothems or cave stalagmites as an analog to reconstruct the climate in the past. Bryant graduated from UC Santa Barbara with a degree in Earth system science and is a McNair alum. That's how we know each other. And he plans to complete his PhD and pursue a career in academia, where he hopes to mentor students from all backgrounds who are interested in learning more about the Earth system. Welcome, Bryant.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That was basically a really good summary. I wrote it, so.
I'm like, I hope that I actually pronounced some words correctly.
Oh yeah, no, that was perfect. No, there's no. I think when it comes to like saying that like speleothem or speleothem, it's kind of interchangeable, so it doesn't really matter.
Nice. So today we have you here, not talking about Earth system science, but talking about kind of navigating these discussions about grad school with first-gen parents. And so just to give us a little bit more context, I would love for you to share with the listeners a little bit more about yourself, your background, and also what led you to pursue grad school.
Right. So I was born and raised in Long Beach, California. And I lived there until about the age of 12. And my mom, she worked. So my mom's a Filipina immigrant who got a job pretty luckily through a friend at this bank. So she was pretty good at math coming out of high school. And so she managed to have a friend when she immigrated here with my father through like a bank, I guess. And she like just did like simple math calculations for them. It's kind of like a small accounting job. But then when her job was automated, they like let her go. And so that was kind of our main form of income, because my dad was retired. And so after that, my mom was looking for kind of caretaking jobs, because she didn't really have any other skills. She could barely speak English. And in Long Beach, it was kind of hard for her because, I mean, just in general, like the barriers for someone who's, doesn't really know English, it's kind of hard to pick those kind of jobs up. So we ended up finding housing in Joshua Tree, California, which is, I think, where a lot of people know of to be a really good touristy area, like very rural. But for us, it was like more of just a chance to move out and find cheaper rent, because housing there the cost of living is like really, really low. So she was able to find a caretaking job out there, and then we were able to make ends meet. But we still kind of struggled with the caretaking jobs, because like it was pretty much on and off. Like certain people like, needed her and some people didn't. And so we basically moved a lot throughout Joshua Tree, just because like, I don't know, it was pretty rough. But during that time, I, living there and transitioning from living in Long Beach to Joshua Tree, I kind of got immersed in the nature that was surrounding the environment. And so at first I was really inspired by the night sky there. And
I love when you share this. I'm sorry. I just have to put it out there because I know you, and I remember you telling me about this, and I'll just let you keep going. But I love your inspiration for your research and your work. So
yeah, no, it was honestly, this is like one of the greatest barriers for entry though, when you think about it. when people go into like geosciences or even the sciences in general. Like when you live in some place like Long Beach, like you don't get that immersiveness. And I think about how fortunate I was to be able to get that opportunity. And so when I moved to Joshua Tree, you know, that really inspired me. And I started to get my academics together. And I was like, I really wanted to pursue a career in astrophysics at first. And then eventually through hard work and, you know, through a program called AVID, which is the Advancement via Individual Determination Program at my high school, they showed me schools. And then I put in a lot of work to get admitted to UC Santa Barbara for physics. And then eventually I took my first astronomy course. I was like, oh, this is it. Like I get to learn what I've been like wanting to learn. And that completely changed my mind about what I wanted to pursue, which is hilarious.
I took an astronomy course in undergrad and thought it was going to be so cool. It was not.
No. It's not that. It's totally not that it wasn't cool. Like I loved the class. I absolutely loved the course, like the subject and everything. But the professor at that time was like, hey, like there's this chapter that we are now going to focus on, and it's on the Earth. And I was like, come on, this is an astronomy class. Like, why are we, what's the point? And like, you know, but then I read into it because I read every chapter up to that point. So I was like, I'm going to read this chapter. And I read it. And I realized that what he was saying about it being one of the greatest generational issues that we'd face was true. Like, I realized then that like through additional article reading that he had provided, that global warming was, or at least, sorry, not just global warming, but climate change in general is a great problem that we have to face. And then that really changed my mind about what I wanted to pursue. I guess that's the kind of long story short. There was a lot of hard decisions I had to make too about switching from physics or astronomy to earth science, but it became kind of natural because I was already like, you know, I like going out into nature. And I like hiking and stuff. So, you know, maybe investing in a career in earth science wouldn't be too challenging. But my decision to really get into that really solidified when I started doing tree planting services, and then learning about through that getting an internship at a nonprofit, and then doing outreach and teaching kids about tree rings, and then learning about how the information from tree rings can tell us about the past. And so from that, I was like, well, this is interesting. Like, I want to learn more about how this information can be valuable and how we can apply that in the future. And so that's how I started taking more courses. I eventually took an upper division course with Dr. David Lee, who is a great professor at UCSB, who taught me all I know basically about paleoclimate up until now, when I have a new advisor, Kathleen Johnson, who's also amazing. But yeah, that's kind of like what spearheaded me into this field of earth science and paleoclimate in general. So yeah, that's I guess my background.
So I want to go straight into it. I'm very curious, actually, now that you described kind of how you went from astrophysics to then studying a chapter or section on the Earth and then transitioning to earth science. Do you talk to your parents about what you study? What do they think about what you study? What do they think you study?
It's so funny. So my this whole time, like I remember in high school, my parents had always like been curious about what I was doing. So throughout all of my, you know, time in school, just in general, like my parents didn't really have that huge expectation for me and my brothers. They knew one thing for sure, though, from other Filipino family members and family friends, that nursing was a really big way to make money, right? And so if they knew that, you know, if we got a high school degree, we could make our way into like a nursing program, but we didn't have to be like the best of the best. So they didn't really expect us to really, they basically didn't set the bar very high. But for me, like I had been inspired by science and I wanted to go this completely different route, and explaining that to my parents like early on was really hard, because they didn't know anything about what that meant. Like, you know, I would tell them stuff about, you know, astronomy. I'd be like, oh yeah, when you look at the stars, you know, you're looking back in time. And then they'd be like, what? And because they don't know. And like that's, I mean, that's not their fault or anything, but for me, like trying to explain that to my parents was always very challenging. And I actually remember sometime in high school, I got into an argument with my parents about the financials of my career, because I told them like, yeah, I want to go into undergrad for science, and I eventually potentially want to go to grad school and all that stuff. And I don't really mind like how much money I make. Like I know that I'll make ends meet at the end of the day, but I'll be committed to learning something that I'm really passionate about, and that's all that matters to me. But for them, they took that like in a very negative way, because
Yeah.
for them money meant everything. And it's
Mhm.
like and it makes sense, because like for my parents, like we struggled like basically all my life. And like for them to hear that their son is not really interested in making a lot of money, it was kind of like backwards thinking.
It's
And
interesting because we're supposed to talk about like first gen parents, but you're talking about not just being a first gen student in college, but being first gen in the US.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so I feel like for a lot of us who have immigrant parents, that's kind of a big deal. You're like, they moved their entire lives over to a completely foreign country for the pursuit of a better life for their children. And so I
yeah.
can imagine why or how like that conflict came about of like, wait, how can you not care, you know?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And it was definitely a really hard conversation. Like I remember crying at the end of it, like telling
Mm.
them like, I really care about this. Like I don't understand why you guys don't understand. But I think later on I realized like, money is really important for them. And so that was something that I had to come to terms with and really explain that I would be okay um, through this career. Like even though I wasn't pursuing something safety or safe like nursing, that I'd still be okay, because I think they were really banking on potentially the idea that like I would end up becoming a nurse or something, or something in the medical field, or
Nurse, doctor,
yeah,
lawyer.
something like that. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
which is funny because like now that now that I'm pursuing a PhD, I remember telling my mom like, yeah, I'm gonna be a doctor now. And she's always like, what? Like, but it's like a different sense, so it's
But do you tell her
like
like not that kind of doctor?
yeah, I tell her not that kind of
Okay.
doctor, but I just tell her it's just like kind of to be funny, I guess.
Yeah.
But I mean nowadays, I come home and my mom actually still always asks me the same question, like, "Oh, so wait, what exactly are you doing?" Like, and I explain it to her, and then like, she'll be like, "Okay." And then my dad, he's getting really old, so it's kind of getting harder for him to remember stuff too. So I'll go home and I'll explain what I'm doing as well. But he'll be happy with what I'm doing though, which is really awesome to know that like my parents still support me in that way. Um, but
I can imagine there's also kind of because I am familiar with your background and kind of your parents, there's a generational difference between your dad and your mom, but also there's difference between like culturally, I would imagine, and also there's a language barrier between your mom and you. Does she speak Tagalog or
yeah,
what?
she speaks Tagalog, and so, you know, trying to explain to her something like paleoclimate or like speleothems, it's like,
I struggle to understand. I and I like have known
yeah.
English most of my
Mhm.
life.
I always try to just bring up, when I talk to my parents, I always just try to bring up climate change, and it's pretty. I think that's something that she sees on the news all the time, and so that is like a way to communicate what I'm doing for her. And the same with my dad. Like my dad is kind of the same way. He watches a lot of news as well, and so I always try to talk about, yeah, like my work is contributing to this stuff, and we're trying to understand it a lot better. And they're like, okay, that's really awesome. And they you know they're like, as long as you're okay like financially, like you're you know and you're doing what you want to do, like that's fine. I think that that's something that I'd always been appreciative of after getting into undergrad, was after that really hard discussion and that really hard conversation. um they'd always been like, if you want to do what you want to do, like we support you. And like I've always really, even though they haven't explicitly said it, they they support me still, and that I really appreciate that.
What I'm hearing from you too is like, so you've talked to them about it, about going to grad school, about what you're studying, but it's not like you just have one conversation and you're done. It's an ongoing kind of conversation, discussion.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like, as you keep having conversations, because, it's true for me too, having immigrant mom, having a language barrier, she doesn't understand English very well. I have struggled in having those conversations, or I struggled more back when I was in grad school. I think a little less now because she understands the benefits that I gained from it. But I'm wondering, like, what are some of the struggles with having these conversations, and what are some of the things that kind of have worked in having conversations? Like you saying, by providing them with an explanation about climate change, which is something that they can understand, it affects their everyday life too, like that has been helpful. And so what are some of the helpful things, and what are some of the things where it's kind of an area of like that's makes it more of a struggle to have conversations with them about it?
Yeah, I definitely think going back to that language barrier, that's a huge thing. Because my mom in particular, she can speak English, but it's like she learned it through watching dramas, basically. So but I think still being able to communicate about the general sense of my work has still been nice. Although I think it kind of weaves in and out, because like my mom like still talks to her family like from the Philippines, and so when she's like trying to talk to them about what I'm doing, she struggles, and I understand that, because like it's not easy to like know what I'm doing, and maybe I'm not the best communicator of what I'm doing either, but she does her best, and I really appreciate that, because I think she does take things out of what we talk about at the end of the day. Like when I tell her about I'm getting my doctoral degree, she remembers that, and she's able to say that to her friends and her family. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is the language barrier, but also it's still nice to have these conversations because she at least remembers. And yeah, I really appreciate that she tries, and my dad does too, but he doesn't really. My dad's really old, so he's kind of like, do what you want, right? And I'm like, okay.
I think that some of us sometimes like stray away from having these conversations precisely because it's hard to have those conversations. Sometimes there's information is lost in translation, and a lot of times our parents, if they're if they're immigrant parents, like you said earlier, you're like, they care about you making a lot of money, but really like they care about you being okay, you being like financially stable, and possibly even being okay enough to take care of them.
No, actually that was something I wanted to mention too. Like when I got the position as a graduate researcher, or when I got admitted, I guess, just in general, my parents were wondering like how much money I'd made, because they wanted to see if I could like help support them financially. And I am very fortunate to say that like the income that I'm making is more than my parents, which is insane to me. Like, and to be able to financially support them like every month is like such a blessing, like yeah, I don't know, like it's weird to put things into perspective now, because like I sit here as like a first gen, coming from a low income family, and I have a bunch of these friends who are making like 80K, 100K, and I'm over here like making like, way
grad
less than that.
student budget. Yes.
Grad student budget.
It's still kind of on the poverty line, especially for California.
Yeah, no, but it's like way more than what my parents have made or are making right now, and it's like that just blows my mind. And
that perspective too, I think, is so valuable, is thinking about it through their lens of like, how did they make it work with so much less?
That's what I'm saying. Like,
I don't know how my mom did it.
No, and it's I mean, I'm really grateful to to have this opportunity, like, and this is kind of what I meant, and maybe in high school, that like, I'd be able to get by because I know how we were able to get by with so little. And like, I don't know, I'm just really thankful that I'm even here, like, so yeah.
If other folks are in a kind of a similar situation where they're wanting to have more conversations with their parents about going to graduate school, maybe they haven't even started graduate school, but they're thinking about it. I know, like, when I was an undergrad and I was thinking about grad school, I didn't even want to tell my mom until after I got in. And I was like, and I don't even want to tell her until I've already SIR'd and said yes, because I don't want her to like try to change my mind, because her impression of it was, oh my gosh, more school. Like, why can't you be done and get a job and get paid good money? Like, I think like her dream was for me to just right away, like, graduate, become a lawyer or a doctor. Because she was just like, Mija, like, you already know English. Like, why are you studying English? Your English is so good. And also, like, for her, it was like, but you're so smart. You could have been a medical doctor. You're so smart. You could have been a lawyer. And she had no context of what a PhD was until after I was done. So the whole time in grad school, it was always like, still in school. When are you gonna be done? When are you, like, you're still writing that thesis? Like, why? Like, it's taking too long. Like, you're just writing. Like, it's no big deal.
That's definitely the same thing I hear from my mom too. Like, oh, like, how many more years? Like,
every time you talk to them, it's like, look, time is ticking. They're not getting any younger.
No, that's definitely really relatable. I don't know. It's an ongoing thing, but you kind of have to explain. I honestly have gone to the point where I'm like, Mom, it's kind of like a job at this point. Like, I would see it as a job. Like,
that's what I would try to contextualize it and explain it to my mom in that way. I was like, I'm not the same kind of student as an undergraduate. I am a professional. I am gaining career skills, all of, I'm teaching, I'm making a living, and all of this is preparing me to become a professor or a researcher or someone, a staff member at a university. So when I would tell her that, like, all of this is for something, and it's going to, like, ensure, or I will ensure, I don't think that the PhD alone will ensure, but I was like, I will do what I have to do to make sure I get a good job afterwards with this training. And then she saw that I got a good job. And it's kind of like other conversations I'm having with her now of like, wait, but you had a good job. Why would you leave your good job?
I see.
But I guess I'm just, for the listeners, I think this is something that it's just a big issue of, parents wanting you to help out. And there's this expectation and there's this sacrifice that needs to be made when you are first gen. A lot of times you have to provide financially in ways that other people in grad school, I don't know what it's like for you and among your cohort mates, but I had cohort mates in my graduate program who were second, third, or multiple generations out of their family members having PhDs, being or doctorates and other professional doctorates, and they had financial support from their parents, and they didn't have to worry about having to explain and contextualize and that whole.
That's definitely the case. I think several people in my department have parents who are also professors, and it's always interesting to see that difference, right? Like, for them it's like, oh, like, they understand, they know. But for me, it's like, it takes that extra, like, step, those extra steps to explain what's going on in my career, and like what's going on at the end of all this. What are we pursuing, and where is that leading to? And I think explaining to my mom that I want to be a professor, she can understand that. She's like, oh, you want to be a teacher basically? And I'm like, yeah, like, I want to teach students, and I also want to do research on the side. And the research aspect, she's still kind of like, okay, but then like the teaching, she at least understands. So I think those are conversations that I think as a first gen student, it kind of takes time to like really fully explain it, because I feel like even now I haven't even I haven't even had enough conversations with my mom for her to like fully understand.
And I think that's one of the big takeaways about it, is that you're not going to get there in one or even a couple of conversations, and it will take time.
Mhm.
But as someone who's on the other end of things, um I I think initially my mom hesitated with learning about graduate school, and she was just like, why? Like, you're not making a
Mhm.
lot of money, like you could get a good job right out of it. But now that I'm done, she brags about me all the time. She's like, "Oh, look at Mija. Like, she has a PhD. Mija tiene un doctorado. Like, anytime anyone comes in, look." And I bet she would hang my diploma if she could. It's really cute that she's very proud of what I've achieved.
Mhm.
Um, but it took time, and it took her to actually see me graduate and get a job and be able to provide for my family and for myself and help others, for her to kind of realize it was actually worthwhile. And I think that may be true for other people. And some parents might be supportive, some parents might not be supportive, and they might just need to like see it to believe it.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of the big thing, is you have to keep having multiple conversations, and the more you can concretize things, the more examples you can give them, the more you can relate it to what they already know. I think
Yeah.
that the better off the conversations have gone, at least for me. Yeah.
Mhm. No, I think that's definitely a really great takeaway, right? Like this conversation is continuous almost, and it's not something that can just have you can have one conversation with their parents and it'd be done. Especially having this perspective, right? Like they don't know, and it's kind of our job to explain. And at the end of the day, if you're explaining the thing that you love to do, um, if your parents really truly support you, then like they might hesitate at first, but you just got to show them like over time that with many accomplishments and like kind of mentioning things, like I find that really helpful too, like mentioning that like I won an award or something, my mom's like, oh, that's good, like I think those things kind of build up too. And so that's what makes the conversation even more continuous, like just a run-on thing until I guess you reach your goal almost. So
I think from my experience, with my mom, because my mom's a single mom, immigrant mom from Mexico, like, struggles with speaking English. The other thing that I think helped her was knowing that she didn't have to worry about me. So
mhm,
even though I was in grad school, I wasn't making a lot of money. I was working long hours, for a period of time. It was hard for me to even make time for friends and family, especially during my exam period, or as I was finishing up. I would try to communicate as much as possible, like, my I would say, like, okay, mom, I've got this big thing coming up and I'm going to be really busy, but I'll be done by X date. So I would always
mhm,
communicate with her, like, by Christmas, like, I'm going to take a break and I'm going to come home and I'm going to have time for this and this and this.
mhm.
So that way, like, kind of like communicating and setting boundaries with family, especially because I know some folks who are going to grad school and still living with their parents. And
Mhm.
then it's even harder
That's yeah. That can be really messy, I think. Especially, from a first generation like household. Like
yeah.
it's like, I don't know, it can be really difficult in those times. And I wanted to mention too that uh visiting regularly though is also really important. I think making sure that your parents know that what you're doing, I guess like going home and updating them is like something really important. Because from my perspective, like I was at UCSB for 4 years, and that was like a 3.5 hour drive from UCSB to Joshua Tree. And so I didn't really get to visit them like at all in undergrad. There were some times where I wouldn't see them like summer to summer, like and that was really hard because I'd only visit for like a few days. But now, like living in Irvine, I'm only an hour and a half away, and it's nicer to be able to like go home and like actually see them and tell them how I'm doing, and just be present too. Because like I said, my dad is getting really old, so like for me, like it's important for me to be there and be home.
So you have
So
to be present to have those
yeah,
conversations too.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that's important because that brings us to thinking about how it's important to have conversations with our parents, especially being first-gen students. It's also important to be there and to not solely prioritize graduate school, because it's really easy as an academic to make that all of your life
Yeah.
and to not have a life or identity outside of that. And for some of us, especially depending on the culture that you come from, family is really important. And so to
Mhm.
be able to like physically be there will allow you to engage in more conversations, because you can't just force them. You can't just be like, okay, mom, I'm going to call you Sunday at 2 so we can talk about grad school. You gotta like kind of just some of these conversations just come
Just
up.
yeah, they
What's the
like,
word for it?
I mean, they just naturally happen sometimes, and you
Yeah.
when you go home and like they'll just ask you, oh, so what are you doing? Like, how's work going or something?
Yeah. How's
That
school? How's
Yeah,
work?
how's school? Yeah, I
Mhm.
think that's the most common question I get when I go home. Like, how's school? And I'm like, it's not really school, but
Yeah.
but yeah, I was like, I try to explain like, yeah, I'm working right now. I'm like, and I'm doing stuff in the lab, and they're like, oh, cool. But then that's it. Like, they don't like try to understand more, but that's okay. Like, I think even just like going home and updating them on like what I'm up to more commonly is nice than not going home like I did in undergrad.
And it sounds like you can see where they're coming from and you see things from their perspective, and that's allows you to be really flexible with kind of with taking in how their responses to like what you share, and
Mhm.
whether they understand it completely or not. Like
Yeah.
you're just like, it's okay, like where they're at,
Mhm.
what they understand. Like there's time, I'm present, I'm
Oh,
there.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's another takeaway is, if someone's interested in going to grad school, they're really nervous about telling their parents, they don't know how supportive they might be, just thinking about it as like, I'm gonna have time to have these conversations. I'm going to you know, make it a point to try to be there. If you can't physically be there, having more phone calls. I
Mhm.
remember when I was away, studying in Chiapas for 3 months, my mom was really scared, didn't know what I was doing, thought I was crazy. I had gone crazy. And I called her every day. And I called her
Mhm.
every day and told her about what I was doing and the research I was doing. And she didn't fully understand, but at least for her, it was like, okay, my daughter's okay. Okay, she's
Mhm.
learning stuff. Okay, nothing's happening to her. So just making it a point of being there, having multiple conversations, not just one, being
Right.
open-minded, trying to see things from their perspective. I think all of that is going to be helpful. And eventually you'll get to a point where they might never fully understand what you're doing, but there's that mutual support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I think emphasizing that message that you are okay, because I think that was, like I said earlier, like my
Yeah.
parents' biggest concern, like, was I going to be okay
You're
pursuing this
okay
thing?
now and you're going to be okay
Yeah,
too and later.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, my mom hasn't seen my house, but my brother recently came by, and then my brother told my mom what my house was like, and she's like, "Oh, you have a nice house," and like, she's really happy about that. Like, it's those little things, like showing that you'll be okay even in graduate school. Um, and I know that maybe not be the case for a lot of people who like are in graduate school right now, because I think STEM is fundamentally different uh, than other fields when it comes to funding. Like, we definitely get a lot more support, but in those scenarios, it's definitely a conversation that you still need to have with your parents about like what you're doing is something you really care about, and like um, something that you're willing to put up with, I guess, if you are struggling uh, as a grad student, because I know that there are students out there that don't get as much funding, so. But I
I
think in general, like when we put graduate school into context with like the rest of like the work field, it's like it's definitely not like as much money, but yeah, it's
but
this.
it's temporary,
Yeah.
like, for X amount of years, you're not going to be making a lot. But then after that, it's not guaranteed, but if if you work on it,
Yeah.
eventually you can, especially if you're flexible with the types of jobs that
Mhm.
you're willing to take on,
Yeah,
you
no.
can definitely make a lot more than in graduate school.
Right.
Yeah,
It's
I
definitely
expect that.
yeah, no, it's an investment,
Yeah.
right? And that's something that we all commit ourselves to. And it's something that basically I read this somewhere. But it was about something like going into graduate school means doing something people aren't willing to do, and you do it because you actually genuinely love it, you know. I read that somewhere. I don't know where that's from, uh uh but yeah, that's what it means for all of us who, you know, are first trying pursuing graduate school for the first time in our families, like history. And it's like something that we want to do because we really want to. And you know, doing that is an amazing thing in and of itself. So
And it's interesting because, as first gen students with immigrant parents, like they were trailblazers in their own way. They're navigating new territories, and in some ways we're doing that too for our generation.
mhm.
And yeah, I think this is a great way to kind of wrap up the conversation. I wanted to ask you if there's anything else you wanted to share on the topic.
Mhm.
And if not, then I think our listeners might want to reach out to you. Some of them might have
Mhm.
resonated with what you said or
Mhm.
with your research interests, or if they want to be in touch, like what's a good way for them to be in touch with you?
Mhm. So I guess maybe one last thing I guess I'd recommend is if you do have a good relationship with your parents, don't forget to acknowledge them. Because I remember how
Oh,
important
I
that
love
was.
that.
I remember
Yes.
how important it was for them, when I made that publication in the McNair journal, to leave that acknowledgement for them. Like, you know, even if they don't read the research part,
They're gonna read the
they're
acknowledgements
gonna read the
for
acknowledgement.
sure.
And no, and that really meant a lot to my parents.
Oh.
And like I think that's really important too. um yeah, otherwise, you know, uh I can be found at UC Irvine. I don't so I just plug my email like here
Whatever you want to
or
share, because some folks have like an academic Twitter or a
oh, okay.
public like
Yeah.
IG,
Yeah,
or
let me
maybe like if there's I don't know, future podcast.
oh yes. So, okay. Yeah. So I'll first plug my academic Twitter, which is my name, Bryant Pahl __. And yeah,
And
and
that's
then
Bryant with a Y,
yeah,
BRY.
BRYANT PAHL __. Um, and then yes, also keep a lookout for a potential or no upcoming podcast on conversations that you can have or that we have with our parents or we want to have with our parents, called Hey Parents. It's going to be hosted by me and my partner Alina too, and it's coming up. So I'll definitely be advertising it a lot on my academic Twitter. So if you follow me on that, um, just uh, just feel free to reach out too
Yeah.
if you want to DM me or anything. So
I'm so glad that you mentioned it. I was like, say
no,
something, put it out there, because once it's out there,
I
you gotta do it.
I know. And it was funny because I was like, oh, like what do I've never like really been on like any of these like kind of like talk shows or
Well,
anything. So I
get
was like,
used to it.
what's going on? And I was like, oh, okay, I'll link some. Yeah, so that was good.
Nice. Well, thank you, Bryant, for joining us. And yeah, thank you all. We'll talk to you all later. Thanks so much for joining me in the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. If you liked what you heard, please rate this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or anywhere you tune in. You can also support the podcast by donating to my Patreon page, Anchor page, or Venmo account, which is at Grad School Femtoring. If you have questions or episode topics, you can contact me by sending me a DM on Instagram, sending me an email to gradschoolfemtoring@gmail.com, sending me a voice message on Anchor, or sending me a message via my personal website at YvetteMartinezvu.com. Until next time.